everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Callum McSorley to talk about his new novel Paperboy, which is out with Pushkin Press, and which is the follow-up to his McIlvanney Prize winning novel Squeaky Clean. Hello, Callum.
Hiya, thanks very much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I really can't wait to talk to you about Paperboy. I've enjoyed reading it so much. It might be an idea, and I enjoyed Squeaky Clean as well, it might be an idea to give people the premise of Squeaky Clean before we move on to Paperboy.
Right, yeah, sure. So Squeaky Clean was set in a car wash where a lad called Davey who works there borrows a person's car to get to a court date. The car gets stolen and destroyed, and it turns out it belongs to this awful gangster called Paolo, who he is then indebted to. Paolo takes over the car wash, and it's kind of what Davey does to get out of this awful situation he's in. Meanwhile, a detective called Ali McCoist, who is in disgrace from having let Paolo go for a previous crime, kind of finds out about stuff going on at this car wash and sees it as her way to kind of find redemption, I guess.
And we've spoken before about knowing that similar places where the first novel is set, and that becomes even more evident in Paperboy, and the importance of place I think is really interesting. But you must have been delighted with the response to Squeaky Clean for a debut novel.
Yeah, I don't think you could expect anything better. It kind of surpassed all my kind of wildest dreams of what could happen, with that first book. I was just kind of like, I hope some people somewhere read it. That's it. I feel like when you first sign like a publishing contract, you're so focused on getting to that stage, you don't really think about what happens afterwards until it comes to publication day, and you're suddenly like, oh no, what if just nobody reads it and it just disappears? There's so many books out every single week, there's so much choice. And it feels so hard to get that publishing deal. There's so many people trying to do it and only a few get through. And then the flip happens and you realise that still there's so many books coming out, and you feel like, you feel like I could just be lost in this,
I just finished listening to a podcast with Denise Mina about it's one of the Bloody Scotland, they're doing podcasts now, Bob McDevitt, and she said that when Garnet Hill came out, her debut novel, there was a pile of them in, I think she said James Thinn's was the bookshop. Her and her mum went in and said, quick, get a picture because they'll all be pulped by next week, and then 20 odd books later, here we are. Wow. So as much as I love Squeaky Clean, which I did, I feel that Paperboy takes everything to another level. And the language, the kind of tension in it, some gruesome deaths, some wonderfully gruesome deaths, and the humour as well. Would you agree? Did you think, people like this, I can dial it up? Or is that
I did. I consciously, I think, yes, I've never written a sequel to anything before. I got a whole bunch of books in drawers that never got published, but I'd never tried writing a sequel to anything. And so I always, they talk about like the second difficult album, right, is the kind of common thing musicians talk about, and writers talk about it too. And my thoughts on that is you can go two directions. You can either do something wildly different, or you can try and replicate what you think was good about the first one that people liked, which I think is the harder route and more likely to fail. Whereas at least if you take a big swing and nobody likes it, you're kind of like, well, it's art, isn't it? I just wanted to do something different. But doing a sequel, you're locked into familiar characters, locations, the style, the tone of it, all these sorts of things, which actually, it makes the writing of the book easier. When you know all this stuff already, you're not building from scratch. But at the same time, it's worrying when it comes. I get not so much when you're working on it, but when it comes time to put it out, you're like, okay, how many sequels are better than the original? How many? The Godfather 2, The Empire Strikes Back. There's not many that people say that. So that's that, and then that was the worry when in March, early March, that's what I started to panic about.
Did you feel that because the first one was so well received, that it kind of allowed you to go, well, people like this, they like these characters, they like the situation, therefore I can really kind of grab it and run with it? And also, did Was it always going to be a series?
It was. So the Squeaky Clean very originally was a novella called Valet, and it was just about Davy and the car wash being taken over and what he does. McCoist came in the final third, kind of just screws everything up in an attempt to save the day. And my publisher read it. This was before anything was signed, and they were like, "We really like this, but we won't publish a novella.
Right.
But we think you should turn it into a novel and come back to us." And so I was like, "Of course I will do that." You know, it was like the best feedback I'd received for anything up to that point. So I went away and just added bits and pieces to it, and then it just grew and grew and grew. I would send it back to them, and they'd give me a list of edits and some things to think about, and I would add more. And it was kind of Frankenstein together into a novel a wee bit. The difference with Paperboy being was that I planned a novel from the beginning, and I feel it shows. I think it's more like driven, more propulsive, more tension, because it was planned from the start. But yeah, I'd say it was that point when I turned it into the novel that I was like, you know, there's more to this story, and I changed the ending to open it a little bit more. The first book had several rewrites of the ending, rewrites of the beginning, in a way that I didn't do that with Paperboy so much. I didn't need to.
And you mentioned that you're. So did you have a publisher before you had any novels ready to kind of give them? You had this novella. Was the novella that got you to the publisher, or was it something else?
It was the novella. So I'd written about 3 novels. The first 2 hadn't happened for me. The third one I signed with my agent with, but then that didn't sell, which was a very harsh reality, because I just had this idea that once you had the agent, that was it. That was you know, the next step was going to happen, and it just didn't. And I went away and wrote Squeaky Clean just because I hadn't written anything long for ages. I was writing loads of short stories, and I was like, I don't know if I can face writing another novel. So I wrote this novella because I'd had this idea about a car wash that I'd kind of stored away for ages, and I was like, I should have a look at that and have a think about it. So so at that point when I wrote it, I had no publisher in mind, which is why the detective was called Ali McCoist and all this sort of stuff, because I was like, I had no idea anyone would read it or like it or anything. And at that point you're like, well, things can always be changed, you know. I kind of assumed at some point if it went anywhere, someone would be like, you have to change that.
Yeah, I kind of wondered if your publisher might have gone.
They liked it, they were fine with it.
Okay.
They're all from London, I don't know, it's just...
We haven't said yet that Ali McCoist is Alison McCoist rather than Alison.
Right, Alison, who I later found out, I think, so the real Ali McCoist's, it's either his sister or his wife is called Alison,
right,
and is therefore also Ali McCoist. Which was funny, but that's something I thought might change and then didn't change, and then it was too late. It was on the shelf, you know.
So the novel starts with a funeral, which for me kind of works as a brief recap of Squeaky Clean. Is that how you meant it to work?
Yeah. So the end. This is where it gets difficult to talk about without spoiling the first book.
It
opens immediately with a big spoiler for Squeaky Clean.
I hadn't even considered that.
But
I'm so concentrating on not spoiling the book we're talking about. But yes, there's something.
I know. Well, it's been a couple of years. I'm like, if you pick up Paperboy immediately, you're going to. That is kind of spoiled for you, and it's partly recap, and it is important ongoing to know. Yeah, I think that's the really tricky thing with sequels, and I'm currently working on a third one, is choosing how to get the information that people need to know from the previous books into it without just dumping all this info. You know, I'm kind of like, how TV shows have like a previously on bit. That would be so handy for books, but we don't. For some reason, in books we don't do that.
But that's the way I thought this worked. That's the way it worked for me. But then, of course, I'd read Squeaky Clean, so it was okay. I guess that's true. And it then has a page of fuck yous, basically, which I won't go into. And I thought this was the first sign I thought, Callum's really having fun with this.
Yeah, it was.
And was that something that your publisher was quite happy to go,
Yeah, I think so. So the fuck yous, for context, is a letter that Lottie, who's one of the new main characters in it, writes to her husband, who has just died. And she puts this letter into his grave, and it's just the word "fuck you" over and over. The Herald someone at the Herald counted up and said it was like 156 fucks. So,
it reminded me weirdly of Edwin Morgan Concrete Poetry. I thought if Edwin had been in a really, really foul mood that day, he went, right, I'm going to do this. But again, I think it shows a writer willing to kind of play around with the form and play around, because there's a lot of playfulness, I think, in Paperboy. You know, it's a Glasgow crime novel, and you acknowledge that, you know, the kind of tropes and types of that, but you play with them as well.
Mm. Yeah, I'm a big fan of wordplay in general. Yeah. I'm a first drafting person. I don't mind editing anymore. I used to really hate it. I feel like I've gotten more used to it as I go on, but I'm a first draft person. I enjoy the first draft because I get everything on the page and all the kind of silly stuff that I want to put in. I just get all of it out there, and occasionally my editor will be like, I think I need to pull back on this bit or that bit, right, okay. And I make it as gruesome as I can. I never pass up the opportunity for a simile or a pun. Do you know what I mean? And then sometimes I cut those back because they're a bit too far. But so Squeaky Clean was really fun to write, and this book that I hadn't sold was like a Victorian set historical crime story.
Right, okay.
So a very different beast. I did a lot of research, very serious and dark and bleak, and I wanted to do something completely different and just have a laugh with it and enjoy writing again, because I was pretty disappointed at that point with the whole endeavour.
When you said it didn't sell, had it been published?
No, it hadn't.
It hadn't sold to...
I got signed with my agent off the back of it because she really liked it, but never managed to sell it to a new publisher, sadly. But so I wanted to do something. I thought I wanted it to do contemporary. I didn't want to have to do a lot of research. I just wanted to write a story and have a laugh with it and make it brutal and kind of silly. And I think like someone described it as like a crime caper, and I was like, I see that label kind of fits. I think, despite some of the more gruesome aspects, I still think there's a good bit of capering. You know,
I think there's now again, this might be because I recognise a lot of the places and a lot of the references and just a lot of the kind of language as well, but there's a truth to it which I think really travels, and that's maybe because you're writing, I mean, it's a stereotype, isn't it, write about what you know, but you really were writing about what you knew in the, maybe not the crime, but the car wash.
The car wash, I knew the setting really well, and so I could put in all these little granular details to make it feel like a real place. And that's another one of the things with doing a sequel, is I'd obviously moved away from that, and now I was out of that familiar territory. And so Paperboy is about a guy called Chuck who shreds confidential waste, and so a friend of mine actually does this job,
right? And
it's his kind of stories that he would tell sometimes
because it's got that detail again.
I squirreled it away, and when I was thinking like, okay, sequel ideas, I was like, this kind of came back, and I was like, this is the time to use that. I think this is perfect, you know. And so I had him I could rely on him for some detail, but again, it's different from knowing something firsthand, and that's another big worry once you've kind of stepped out of that comfort zone, you know. And
after we've had the funeral and the fuck yous, it jumps about a year. Is it a year?
Yeah, about half a year or so, I think. I'm quite vague with the timeline. Sort of time in the future.
Some time in the future.
A bit farther forward,
but some things have happened. Again, without spoiling anything, can you tell us what's happened in that time? Because Alison's, roles change slightly.
Yeah. So she gets a promotion, following on from Squeaky Clean, which arguably she has not earned. She's kind of finessed into the position, but due to a big scandal in Police Scotland, and lots of guys get the sack, and she moves on up. And there's a big question over whether this has kind of been orchestrated a little bit for her or not, or whether it's just good timing. But so she's now a bit more senior, more responsibility, and she at the beginning of it, she goes to a crime scene where there's this corpse who they soon find out is a lawyer, kind of crusading lawyer. And she knows him from Squeaky Clean. They met in that book, and so she's suddenly very worried about what his death means and what it is, and if it's related to things she has been involved in the past.
Because there's a few returning characters, and we'll be talking about characters a bit later, and some of them who didn't have a lot in the first book. Was that something you wanted to do? Kind of explore some more about these maybe secondary characters?
Yeah, and bring them forward again. There was a character called Tim in the first book, who was Davy's colleague at the car wash and kind of one of his only real friends, to be honest with you, although it was quite one-sided. Davey was not appreciative of Tim, and Tim was kind of trying to help him out because he kind of feels a bit sorry for him and wants to help him. So Tim kind of returns in this one in a slightly bigger capacity again. And
I think you've answered this a little bit already, but it feels like you had a blast writing this, that you really enjoyed it. I'm sure it was hard work, of course, but it's certainly a blast to read it. That's how I read it. I mean, just in chapter 1, you've got rats on gack, which are,
super rats.
Super rats. There's reference to transmit, and you've got this body in a very, very bad way as well. Do you enjoy the referencing? Do you enjoy coming up with the kind of, I guess you just enjoy coming up with the scenario and writing the book from start to finish?
It's so much fun. Like, I love the planning stage, actually. I've started planning things a lot. I've started buying cards and laying them out across the floor and all this sort of stuff, which I never used to do, and I actually really enjoy it now.
Right.
But yeah, all, like the kind of pop cultural references, like, there's like Glasgow references and this kind of wider pop cultural stuff. I really enjoy putting all that stuff in, although I think I did an interview with Kevin Peagleday, the poet at the Stand recently, and he was saying like, oh, I enjoy this reference stuff, and he's like, I think it kind of ages you a little bit. It shows you like where, because there's a reference about pogs and stuff like that in Paperboy, and he's obviously like, that's, for him that's we're obviously not too far apart in age, so that reference landed really well with him, and he's like, but obviously for younger readers, pogs aren't a thing anymore. So it kind of does date things slightly. I guess that's true.
I guess that is true. But I think, I'll talk about some of my favourite references in a moment, and some of them I guess might do that. But it's the specificity that I really enjoy, and I think I can see how myself and Kevin would enjoy the Glasgow references that but I think it would go further, because every... there's one about the variety bar, or the fish tank in the variety bar, which
sad fish.
Really made me laugh. And I was thinking every city will have a variety bar with a
fish tank. 100%. Yeah.
Folk in the night might be feeding something into it, or whatever it is. But I think that kind of that truth is vital. For it to kind of work at all, I think you have to be. You're not just making places up. It's specific places, including roads that they might walk down, or parks that they might pull up to, or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's weird. I think using the specific can create a generalization as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're really specific about it, and people are like, but I know a place like that.
Yes, that's exactly
near where I am, even though you. And I think if you're more vague about it, I'm not sure that works as well. Oddly, although that sounds kind of like a contradiction.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes when you conjure up a place very specifically, and people can see it more clearly, and then they're also like, but I know, because like the car wash in Squeaky Clean is a real place that I described as it is in real life. But lots of people come and say to me like, oh, is that the one on this road or that road? And I'm like, oh, it's not that one, it's this one.
It's the one my dad used to get his car washed when he came to visit me. And when it is, there's a kind of, and I've always said this, I remember reading James Kelman early on and thinking, I could walk through the streets of Partick, that from How Late It Was, How Late, you could do that.
Yeah.
Now that's great because I'm in the city, but the accuracy of it, knowing that reads true, means that it would work wider as well. So I think that you're right. It does sound like it shouldn't work that way, but it does.
I think there's also just that element of like putting your reader in the place and just letting them be carried about without holding their hand and stuff like that. Is just makes like. I've read plenty of novels set in Los Angeles, so there's certain street names that I know, but I've never been there, and I've not seen them other than through the eyes of a story.
Yes.
So I don't really know what it's like or what it feels. But it's nice to be taken through the city in that way, and it sounds really cool and exotic. I think it helps they've got all these Spanish street names in LA as well. It's a really cool vibe to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it helps.
Just going back to the Victorian novel, when you were writing that, did you research to give it that authenticity as well?
Yes, but I did. I was supposed to be set in like 1870, but I put things in there that were not strictly at that time. Yeah, because there was, like the Herald building was the the lighthouse museum on Buchanan Street. That the Herald used to be there,
right?
And the tower was a big water tower because it had this brand new sprinkler system for the presses below, and that the water tower fed the sprinklers. But by the time I was writing, they'd already moved building to somewhere else. But there was a scene where one of the characters went to meet a Herald reporter, and I was like, I really want it to be in that building.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I just have to, I have to just fake that. It's not going to be accurate, but I wanted it to be there. But I needed that date for other things. I had to make all these compromises, essentially.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to a writer, Craig Smith, who's got a new novel out, which is partly set last century, but it still wouldn't need the kind of research that you're talking about. But he is trying to write one in Edinburgh, I think just as the new town's being built, if I'm right. I'm sorry, Craig, if that's wrong. But he said at the moment he's trying to research it, and he's finding it so difficult to say where there's sash windows, where there pavements with curbstones, where there are all these things, and getting lost in all of that stuff.
I remember I went to a wee event that Graham McRae Burnett did in Woodlands. There's this little kind of workshop there. Right. It was just newly opened. This is going back quite a few years. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a tiny audience. I was like, I doubt he's done a gig that small ever since,
Yeah.
But he was talking about historical accuracy with regards to his bloody project, and obviously it's so well researched, and he did a lot of work on that. But he was like, there's things like, I was like, do people use forks? But at that point to eat their food, he was like, I don't know. Could I find out? Possibly, but it could take me literally years of research to find out for this one tiny detail about someone using a fork, And he was like, sometimes you have to weigh up, is this worth it? Is it worth the use of the time?
Absolutely. And I guess going back to Paperboy, there was none of that you really needed to do. Maybe you had to think when pogs were stopping.
Stop being cool. Yeah, I know. It was. Yeah, there's some police procedural stuff that I have some folk that I can speak to about. It's a different kind of research, though, I would say, for sure. Have
you spoken to other crime writers about that side of things, about how much to research? Because I'm guessing it'll different from person to person.
I've spoken about it because Squeaky Clean is like, it's got procedural elements, but I don't think you could really sell it as a police procedure or Paperboy. I think that would disappoint a reader if they're expecting that kind of thing. Sure. And then it's not really. It's more about gangs and stuff like that, really. And the police are kind of like a gang in these books. They operate like that.
Yeah.
They're not really strict about laws and stuff. I tried to put a little bit of authentic legal things in it, but it's not really my bag, and it's not what I want to do with the story. But I've spoken to I'm good pals with Neil Lancaster.
Right. Yes.
He obviously has his. He doesn't need to really research his because he lived that life.
Yeah.
Doing covert policing. So all his stuff is just true from his life, but I can ask him about it, and he's like, you want to leave most of it out anyway.
Yeah.
He's like, it's good for you. He's like, it's good that I know it because I know what is accurate and what is inaccurate.
Yeah.
He's like, but if I just put in all these things, like the amount of paperwork you need to do to set this operation up, he was like, it would bore you to tears. It's not the exciting bit of the job, He's like, you want to capture the exciting bits, and he's like, you can brush over that stuff by having, the DI is going to phone up whoever is authorised. He's like, that's what I do. I don't go into all the forms that he is going to have to fill out, all the calls he's going to have to make. He's like, because nobody really wants to read that.
Sometimes I think when you have that knowledge, it's certainly, again, with research, particularly with historical novels, folk maybe want to, I've learned all this stuff and I want to put it in the book, and actually it doesn't move things along at all.
100%, I think that's the big struggle. It's not doing the research itself, it's leaving out all the cool things that you have learned that don't actually fit in the story.
I edited a historical novel which had a chapter on flying falcons, kind of falconry in the Middle East, and it was fascinating to read, but it had I thought it had no reference to the rest of it, so I kind of had to have many conversations about it going. You mentioned now enjoying the editing process. Is that because you've got an editor that you really trust, or is it just becoming more used to it?
Yeah, I think it's both. I get on really well with my editor and trust his judgment on things. We occasionally, I think the only time we ever, not argue, we just, talk back and forth is usually about small jokes and stuff like that. He'll be like, does this joke really work? And I'm like, I think it does. And he he usually kind of lets me go with that, and he's kind of like, well, fine, but it's on your head, you know. There's a joke about Vin Diesel that he was not sure about, and I was like, I think it works, I think it's good. And he was like, okay. And then someone actually messaged me just for that line about Vin Diesel. It was just a quote, and I was like, felt quite vindicated about it. But yeah, it's partly that, and just getting used to the process. You know, I think the first time you get notes back, and it just seems like so much.
Do you feel a bit defensive?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and less so as I go on. But there's always that gut reaction at first of defensiveness. It's hard to get rid of that, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you take a couple of days to digest it, and then you make your plan and you work through it in a sort of mechanical way, and it's I'm more like, I like line edits rather than big stuff. I like tinkering with all the bits and pieces. I could do that all day. But yeah, if it's like, I think you need to make this whole chapter occur somewhere else, that is a dread, you know, like that kind of thing.
Major.
The major works, that's when I need someone to tell me to do it. You know, that's where having an editor is good for me, because I would just be lazy about it otherwise, and just be like, it'll be fine, you know. Because even like sometimes when you send something over, you know something isn't quite right. Yeah. And
do you think you kind of deep down you might know that?
Sometimes like I feel like I'm trying to get away with something here, and your editor's like, hold on, like.
I think that is a sign of a good editor. Is that they can put their finger on it.
And say, and actually say, what's wrong with this is this thing, you know. Not to give you a solution to it as such, but just to be like, explain why it's not working. Because sometimes that's just a feeling for you that you can't articulate. And if you can't articulate it, it's hard to then fix it.
It's interesting hearing you talk about the different stages that it actually takes. And I guess they never end, because then you've got the third novel and all that. But, you know, you write, you get the agent, you publisher, and then you've got the editorial process, and then you've got the debut coming out and all the fears that you mentioned at the beginning. So, you know, these things, it's the life of a writer, I guess, that it just keeps on going.
It just keeps on going. The feedback, the criticism, the rejections. I think that's like you open yourself up to a lot more kinds of rejections once you're published that you don't think about. Rejections from readers, from media people, from television people. That's, you know, there's so much of that. They love rejecting people. That's like their thing.
That's their thing.
I always think screenwriters, like, I think a novelist you have to grow a thick skin to rejection, but I feel like screenwriters must actively enjoy it. In a masochistic sense. Like,
they wouldn't do it so much.
I know. Like.
Well, going back to the kind of references and the things that particularly jumped out to me, you've mentioned the where Chuck works, and his company's called Simply Shred, which was absolutely fantastic. References that I enjoyed: Dogtown and the Z-Boys, because there's a bit of skateboarding in there as well. And there's, I haven't thought about that film for years going on. Some of the salt market shops, so I've said to you before, and listeners may know, I used to live on High Street in Glasgow. Salt market's the other side of the cross, and some of the shops, that there's the pet shop, which seems to have been there for it's still there, and this huge pet shop that I've never seen many people in. And the other one is the shop at the bottom of the salt market, and I don't know if it is still there, but Triple X DVDs.
Yes, that was there for a long time. You'd always go past it on the bus. I feel it was there long after Triple X DVDs would have been a profitable business.
You know, also the sideline thing, it used to say, we will take your videos VHS and put them on DVD. It was
what kind of videos?
Really odd place. It was like the old kind of Glasgow video, with inverted comma shops, was it was hanging on to the end. You see a lot of them in the banners. And there's a quote, if I can read from your own book. I thought this was the wisdom of Confucius. This was absolutely spot on. The trajectory of a man's life tends to go from the figurines to the sex room, then back to the figurines. And I thought, that's exactly that is a man summed up in one sentence. And, you know, looking at stormtroopers over my shoulder. But that kind of thing, you must when you come up with that, go, I like that.
No, I sometimes come up with a funny line. I think that's a good one, you know, like sometimes you just have a good day. I think when you're writing, you know, and these things just kind of appear. Other times it's kind of, you feel like you need something in there, and you have to sit and think about it for a while, about what could go in. Something that, sometimes you just get a feel for, like, when I need to put in a wee joke or something here, a simile of some kind that just kind of livens this paragraph up a wee bit. But sometimes when they just kind of pop out kind of fully formed already. It's great.
It is, and the book's full of them, and I don't think I laugh out loud at many books, but in Paperboy, I genuinely laugh time after time. There was things coming out. Should also say as well, again in a kind of comedy way, I was thinking about the Evil Dead movies. Some of the deaths are really gruesome,
yes,
but funny as well.
Yeah, I would say so. Like my I think what I aim for is see the first series of Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Right, which I think that was a really blackly funny series, and it kind of lost its humour along the way. It became quite a serious drama after the first series. I went off it a bit. I've kind of seen bits and pieces of the rest of it, but the first season is the only one that I've really watched all the way through. But there's a bit in the first season where they're disposing of a body, and Walter the scientist asks Jesse, who is the novice, to get these plastic tubs to put the body in, and they're going to burn it with acid. But the boy can't find a big enough plastic tub, so he thinks, I'll just chuck him in the bath. And he puts him in the bath and pours the acid in. And obviously he's asked for these plastic tubs because it's a specific kind of plastic that is not going to corrode.
Yeah.
So they come in the house, and not only is the body melted, but it's melted right through the bathtub, through the floor, and there's just goo, like bloody goo of what is the remains of this body just all over the hallway and on the stairs. And it's their facial expressions when they come in and see this like horror is inherently very funny, even as monstrous as the situation is.
It's that lovely thing about going, oh my god, but then you've got a smile on your face while you're reading it as well.
So for me, that's the gold standard that I like to kind of aim for with that sort of stuff.
And do you have to kind of research what happens to a body if?
No, I just kind of speculated. Like I was like my friend who's the shredder was keen to help. I was like, do you think, again trying to avoid spoilers?
Yeah.
Would a person go like? Then I think there's all sorts of safety devices in real life that would probably prevent such a thing from happening.
Yeah.
But he watches these shows where like, guys make medieval swords and then they test them out on like ballistic bodies, that gel stuff that they can recreate flesh and bone with. For bullet testing as well. And we looked online, and you can buy like a head for like $100, and I was like, that's a lot cheaper than I thought it would be.
Definitely.
I thought these things would be insanely expensive, and so I considered it. But then we were kind of like, no, but if we actually break the shredder, that's a lot more expensive than $100, So I was like, it's not worth him getting fired over. But yeah, I know what we've done exactly.
So again, one of the strengths of the book is the characters. We can maybe talk a bit more about them. So Alison McCoist is the central character, Ally McCoist, as you say. Have you had any feedback from that? I mean, any kind of move from either the man himself or from which we know football fans can be fervent.
Yes, yeah. I mean, to be honest, not really. I've had the odd comment about it, but most people just find it funny from both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
Ali himself recorded a message for me actually when I was at Helensburgh Book Festival last month, and the organisers managed to get in touch with him, and he recorded a message to send, and they played it at the event, which is amazing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I think that he's given me the kind of the blessing.
Yeah.
He's quite happy with that. I think if he didn't like it, if he found it annoying, that would be quite awkward to continue to write books that I know a particular person would find irritating.
You picked on a pretty laissez-faire footballer that would be just cool about these kind of things. Definitely, I can think of a few that might not. I mean, Paolo Di Canio or something like that might have been. Who knows? And this thing they've got William Jameson in this time round, and talk about a criminal. This is he's quite a character. You talk about him. I know you don't want to give away
so Billy, he's an older chap who's he would not describe himself as a gangster anymore. He's a legitimate businessman. He works in security and investigation. He has an office in the Merchant City, and he has all these kind of legitimate seeming things about him. Yet his connection to Chuck is through illegal information dealing, essentially. Billy, that he doesn't trade in guns and drugs and things anymore. He trades in information, and is kind of a shadowy, behind the scenes sort of guy, but with a very violent past.
Yeah.
He doesn't get his hands dirty anymore, but he has this kind of terrifying reputation for those who remember him.
Yes.
From the era of his youth.
Yeah. It's I was watching the Unforgiven the other night, the Clint Eastwood. It was after Gene Hackman passed away. I'm going to watch this. I love that, and I thought kind of about how William Money, the Clint Eastwood character, has tried to kind of clean up his act and all that, and then at the end he's pushed to be, and the kind of old guy that everyone was feared is still there, and it's kind of that with Billy. I think that he's his reputation has not died. No,
and he is kind of working away at things behind the scenes.
Yeah. And that kind of actually trying to be legit, and the world is kind of trying to be legit from. That clash is often where a lot of the kind of tension, but also another place where humour happens as well, because you can't believe sometimes how things have turned out so badly.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to write Billy as someone who never jokes about things ever. Yeah. Things that he says are always very literal, and he kind of lacks this sense of humour, which kind of puts people off him a little bit. It makes him a little bit cold or strange in a way, which I liked. That was interesting to kind of talk about, because I wanted him to be quite different from Paolo, who was the antagonist of the first book, who cracked jokes all the time and was a bit of a lad. And loved. He's a man who loved his life of crime. He loved it. He loved it. He would, the whole don't get high on your own supply stuff didn't really apply to him. He very much liked to throw his weight around, and he loved to hurt people, and he loved the whole business of being a gangster. It was his identity. Yeah. Whereas I wanted Billy to maybe have passed through that kind of stage of his life.
A character who is new to the novel is Chuck, who's a great creation, and would you call him hapless, or he becomes embroiled kind of despite himself, doesn't he?
Yeah, he can't really help himself. He's very much addicted to gambling, and he has bad debts with sketchy people, which is how he ends up kind of passing this information on to Billy, who kind of uses his place in this world, his old contacts, to kind of keep the wolves at the door for Chuck in exchange for any information that he can glean from wherever he goes about doing his business. One of the things I thought after reading the book is I must get myself a personal shredder. Yes, you said do it yourself.
Yeah, do it myself. I know where it's gone. And another character I wanted to talk about, because got a big role this time, is Lottie. Yes. Who's a fantastic creation. Yeah. Is she in Squeaky Clean?
She's not.
Oh, right, okay.
Paolo mentions her in a sort of the old ball and chain sort of way.
Yeah, kind of dismissive way.
Yeah, I don't think she's named in it, and she never appears herself. And I just thought it was when I was coming up with ideas for the novel, I was like, he has this wife who's now widowed, and I was kind of like, what kind of person marries a man like this? Because he's not going to hide his nature at all. He's not that
You're
type.
going to know who he is.
Yeah, and I was like, Lottie is this character who is, obviously her circumstances have just massively changed now that he's not around on the scene, and she's in an exposed place. She's not sure how she's going to make money now, and
there's people circling that might.
A lot of people are deserting as well. That used to be loyal to him are now working for other folk, and she has 2 daughters who are in their kind of late teens to support, and this lovely house that she has. Her passion in life for the past decade has been decorating this amazing house, kind of fighting against Paolo and his terrible taste to make it really nice. But I just thought it was interesting, her complicity in what he does, because I was like, she's going to know that how he makes his money, how he makes his living, and that people suffer because of it. And I just thought it was an interesting predicament for someone like that to be in, and what would they do next in this situation.
I was going to ask you if you had feedback from the police saying, oh, well, that wouldn't have happened, or is that person or something like that? I don't know if you have.
No, not really. So after Squeaky Clean came out, a very nice detective inspector got in touch and was like, "Oh, I thought you did really well with the procedural stuff." Brilliant. And he was like, "I think he kind of said, I think you've captured the kind of the lot of a woman working in quite still a male dominated field, like the police, quite well." And he was like, "If you ever have any questions, get in touch."
Oh, that's brilliant.
So he's now one of my kind of favourite
connections
to ask about police stuff. And I know obviously Neil Lancaster, I ask him about spying and things sometimes, and a couple of my neighbours are both in the police. There's quite a few people in one of my my kind of very original police contact was my brother's brother-in-law, who's a cop, and he's always been really, really helpful with this sort of stuff. So I try, but no, I don't think anyone's ever said, "Oh, you got this really wrong." But I do know there are things that are probably not plausible.
Right. Or even just right, or just the kind of feedback which you've obviously had, which is great. Yeah. So the other side of that is, have you had anybody, perhaps from the criminal fraternity, saying, "Is that based on?"
No, I don't. No one's come up with that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, the criminal stuff is I've read bits and pieces of like true crime things, but yeah, I mostly make it up, and I'll sit and think about, I'm like, where could you hold this clandestine meeting where you don't want, or where are you going to whack someone where you don't want everyone knowing? But then I was reading a thing that my agent had sent me about these gang families in Glasgow who've had a feud going back, for a long time, and it's a bit about their history and the contemporary stuff, and honestly they just like kill each other in the car park at Tesco and stuff. It's like really, really out in the open, really not caring about, will I get caught for this? Do you know what I mean? They're just like, there was part of the story was that guy, he was killed on the school run. He was taking his kids to school, and someone pulled up and shot him, and I was like, wow, first of all, it's like, you really don't care about witnesses, you also don't really care about collateral damage as well. It sends this quite stern message in that sense. Yeah. You'll put anyone in danger just to get to you. You're not safe doing anything. But I was like, they also really don't seem to care about going to jail over this. It's interesting. Well, I'm kind of working at. I'm kind of working on the assumption that people don't want to go to jail, or care very deeply about not going to jail. I'm kind of like, maybe I'm wrong about that.
And I'm trying to remember where Lottie's house is in the city.
It's Nits Hill Road.
Yeah.
In is that Pollock Shields? It's based on a house I worked in once as a decorator. I got called up by a friend who ran a decorating firm, and he just needed bodies because he was like, I'm redoing this entire 3-floor massive like Victorian or Edwardian house or something, and he just needed as many people on this job as possible to like do a bit of painting and sand everything down, and I based it on that house, and it was
Well, I'm going to talk about place in a moment, but something that's just occurred to me from what you said previously was actually Glasgow gangsters. There's a lot written about them. At one point, I think when Borders, the bookshop, was still there, if you went to pay for your book, they would have a selection of, you can buy this or just pick up, and there was often a biography of someone who had either been to jail or was well known as. There was lots, and you've got the infamous Digger magazine and a lot of
I think I mentioned the Digger in the stories, or maybe in Squeaky Clean. I can't remember. Clean. Yeah, the Digger.
Which, for those who don't know, is it often tells you what's going on
in the underworld. In the underworld, court. It's all court reporting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I met a guy who worked for the Digger when I was in the car wash.
All right.
He was a customer. He'd come by sometimes, and he was I think he was just leaving the Digger, and he was like, because I was studying journalism at the time, and he was like, well, they're looking for a court reporter if you can do good shorthand, and I was like, I cannot. So it's not for me.
But there is a lot written about Glasgow gangster life. I don't know if that's the same in every city, but it's
whether it's just Glasgow as a place, people are fascinated about it.
Make these folk into kind of celebrities.
Yeah, there's a kind of folk mythology to some of it, isn't there? You can see the same thing in Mexico with the cartel gangs and stuff like that. Some of those guys are like almost mythical heroes, aren't they? Like, and they sing songs about them, all these sort of things. They have like narco ballads, like contemporary folk ballads about drug dealers and murderers and stuff. It's interesting. Maybe there's a wee bit of that going on in Glasgow.
I think possibly. I think possibly that there might be kind of admiration somewhere along the line. And again, place set in Glasgow. We've mentioned a few of the places. How do you map out your novel, so to speak, if that's a thing? How do you decide he's going to go to Rutherglen or he's going to,
Yes, I think sometimes I just want to space things out a wee bit. I'm kind of like, I need people to move away a wee bit from here or there. Yeah. Sometimes it's just a familiar place that I want to write about. Like one of the characters in the next one lives in the New Gorbals and near those flats with the scary angels.
Yes,
I just wanted to write about that building because it's so unusual.
It's very unusual.
It's really weird, and I wanted to put it in somewhere. And I was like, well, he could live in that area, and it's the right distance from other parts of the story. And quite a lot of the next one's set in the south side in Govan Hill and things. There's a scene in Queen's Park and things like that, which I know Queen's Park really well because I used to live in this area, and really it's a place that I love and want to write about. And in Paperboy, there's the Cunninger Loop that they go to, which is the park in Clyde Gateway.
Up at the canal.
Yeah, which I take my kids there all the time, and there's what I like there is the Hope sculpture that I talk about, which is this statue of a boy standing on top of this massive plinth. Yeah, really, and it was put there to commemorate the big climate conference that they had, and look into the future and all that stuff. And I think it's interesting that that's there while all the kind of promises are continuing to just slide and nothing's really been done.
Absolutely, but the statue's there.
The statue's there, and it's all the slabs underneath the statue have short poems written by the kind of good and great of Glasgow's writers, which is really interesting.
So you've talking about that's the next one's going to be Govan Hill. When do you start thinking about the next one?
So Paperboy is quite late. I didn't really know when to begin because it was just a 1-book contract for Squeaky Clean, so I had no contract for a sequel. I knew that like a publisher won't buy a sequel until the first one's out to kind of see how it's going to do and how they think it will continue to do. So I didn't write anything, and then I won the McIlvanney Prize, and by that point I'd only really written an outline. I had a wee plan because I thought maybe I should I'd started working on something else and given up, and I think with the whole publication stuff I was just all out of sorts and my routines were all weird, and I just didn't really know what I wanted to do at that point with my writing, knowing a sequel would be on the cards if this does well. And then my editor came up for the prize ceremony at Bloody Scotland and then was like, right, we need to talk about your next book once he was back down south.
Probably terrified someone else.
Well, I mean, at least another publisher probably wouldn't want a sequel either without.
That's true.
So it was kind of safe in that respect. But it was really at that point that I started writing the sequel, and then my third one. When did I start planning that? I can't. It was a while ago now. Okay. But I planned it out and sold. So I sold both Paperboy and this third one as outlines, which is an interesting thing to do because obviously the first book you really have to have it finished.
Sure. And
you go straight into editorial. But having sold it on an outline and having a contract in place when I literally have to write the book was a bit funny, a bit of a different experience.
Yeah.
A certain kind of pressure of its own. Because I was like, someone's actually waiting on this now. Yeah. In a way that your first book, nobody's waiting to read it. So it's for yourself, really. Yeah. So that it changes how you feel about it a bit.
I mean, I think all writers would have a pressure, that pressure you're talking about there of following up, their debut novel. But with it being a McIlvanney Prize winning novel, did you think, people? One, you must have known then, people are going to read it. Definitely. And did you feel the pressure of the prize, so to speak?
Yeah, I think you have to try not to think about it when you're actually working. But I'd say every first draft, maybe around 30,000 words, 60,000 words, you kind of hit this wall, and all the self-doubt creeps in all of a sudden and kind of engulfs you, and you're like, what if it's just terrible and blah blah blah. And it was at those points that that kind of extra thing would come on top of it and be like, and also you've got to try and, not win the award again, but like do something that is kind of worthy of having won it with the first book, which is straight, because it's kind of unusual to win that for a first book. Yeah. Which,
because there's a debut novel prize as well.
Yeah, there's a debut novel prize. I think Francine Toon is the only other writer to have won it with a debut, the McIlvanney. So there's this kind of weird, most other writers are further in their career when they've got to that point, and therefore I think they won't necessarily feel, I now have something to prove. Do you know what I mean? Because they feel like, well, I've been doing good for this long and it's now been recognised. Yeah. Whereas for me, doing it the first time, it's like, I now have to prove.
Where do I go now?
Yeah, I now have to prove that I'm worthy of having won it, almost,
Yeah. And did you always want to write crime?
It's I when I wrote short stories, which I did for a long time, I wrote in all sorts of genre, just whatever I wanted to do. A lot of things, though, even if I was writing something that was like sci-fi or horror, it would have a bit of a crime flavour to it, just as the kind of plot. I'm a big fan of like William Gibson, his Neuromancer is my favourite book, and
right,
one of my favourite books, and that's a heist novel at the heart of a really brilliant sci-fi story. But it's the bones of it, the skeleton of the plot is a heist story, is crime, you know, and the characters he writes about are all live in this kind of criminal underworld to a various degree, which is really interesting. It makes them really interesting. And so, yeah, it's always been in the kind of, you know, I've always read the genre and, yeah, wanted to kind of stay within that.
And do you think the crime umbrella, for want of a word, is wider than it's ever been? There's you know, you've just mentioned Neuromancer, which most people would have in their sci-fi shelves. There's a crime aspect to it.
Yeah, there's a merging of the two things.
And particularly looking at the books that are put forward for prizes at Bloody Scotland, there's such a wide variety of ones that could be in other genres, historical fiction, science fiction. You'll get Christopher Brookmeyer's most recent book.
Where does that sit? It's part parody, it's part crime, part sci-fi, it's got all these things going on. It's brilliant. I read that book and I thought I will be shocked if it doesn't win the McIlvanney as soon as I read it. So yeah, they've started this new sort of Tour de France thing where you get to hand over the prize to the next winner now. So I got to go and give Chris the prize, which was really nice.
Oh, fantastic!
Because he's been really supportive of the books, which was great.
Do you have crime writers that have kind of inspired you, that or even just that you love?
Yeah, I love Louis as well. I found so the Cutting Room I read when I was really getting into hard-boiled detective stuff, and I was reading like Raymond Chandler. Yeah. Then I read this book that it had all these bits of Chandler in it, but it was in Glasgow, and I recognised the place. But it was also, it was familiar and unfamiliar. It was also seedy and glamorous, yet it was still Glasgow, you know. And that's been like a hugely inspiring book for me. Denise Mina as well. I love The Long Drop. Yeah, is one of my favourites. Chris Brookmeyer, of course. There's a book called Out by a Japanese writer called Natsuo Kirino.
Okay, don't know.
So it's about these 4 women who work at a box lunch factory doing the night shift. And one of them kills her husband, and they group together to dispose of his body using their work tools and split the insurance money that she gets. And like they do such a good job, the Yakuza get involved and stuff like that because they want to hire them, and it like becomes this. It's very, very dark and absurd, and quite the characters are all quite real despite the kind of wild things that begin to happen to them. And that was a massively inspirational book for me.
And are you inspired by film and TV as well? Does that kind of feed into?
Yeah, I do love film. I watch a lot of films. Yeah. I think less so television.
Right.
I feel it hard to get into TV series. This like see if it's something that's got like loads and loads of series already.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, it seems like
like 9 series of Bosch, for instance, is a good one. Yeah. Because I think, I mean, you mentioned TV loves to reject things. Has this been spoken about in television terms?
It's been optioned, and some things, like a couple of scripts were written, things are happened, and things fell through, and it's like the industry is quite like that. I think it's one of those things. I'm not gonna. I try not to sit and think about it because I could be waiting a long time, you know.
Of course.
And it can be very disappointing, you know. But
and is there a kind of cycle of when you have a novel out? It's in paperback just now. When's it coming out? I don't know, paperback just now. It's called Paperboy. Yeah. That's where I get mixed up. It's in hardback just now. Do you know when it's coming out in paperback?
It's scheduled for March next year, just a full year after. But
is that how the cycle works?
It's usually how it's slated, but it can change due to other factors can change it. Like so, Squeaky Clean, when it came out in paperback, it became Scottish Book of the Month for Waterstones. Yeah. And their books of the month are always brand new paperbacks for that month, so that's how they organise it. So Squeaky Clean came out a bit earlier to be in the shop for that time, because Waterstones said to the publisher, we want that for this month, and they were like, fine, perfect, you know. So it can change various things, but usually it's about a year.
Right.
But so I've got the paperback of that coming out, and a few months later the third one in hardback will arrive.
So we've got a wee while to, for those of us who love these books, a wee while to kind of
but not as long as the last time, because there's a 2-year gap between Squeaky Clean and and Paperboy because of my unpreparedness and my single book contract, etc.
And do you even think beyond that, or?
Well, yeah, I do. I have a different book coming out late 2026 that I'm really excited about. It's a book that I've been working on for years and years, and it's very different, and I'm really excited about that.
Good. That sounds excellent.
But beyond that, I need to think. It's just it's funny going from just writing books for yourself to going to now I have all these, I know what I'm doing for the next few years and things like that, because of the schedules, you're working years in advance, which is quite a funny position to be in.
Yeah, and it must come out, we've talked a few times about the different stages of the writer's life, but now does it feel like the writer's life now that you're in this kind of schedule?
Yeah, no, I would say so. I think so I'm a stay-at-home dad is what I spend most of my time doing, although my son is now in school, my daughter's just started nursery this year, so I'm spending quite a lot of time on writing. So I would say it does feel like that the writer's life now, and I've got deadlines and things to get on with, do you know what I mean? It's I feel like earlier on it's quite difficult to, when someone asks you what you do, to be like, oh, I'm an author. It feels a bit cringy. It takes a certain amount to get over that. I don't know if that's like a Scottish thing. I don't know if other writers from other countries feel differently about that, but it's kind of embarrassing almost.
I know what you mean, but when your books are in the
once it's in the shop and it's on the shelf and someone's like, oh, well, I've heard of anything, you're like, well, you can go in the shop and go and see it. That kind of changes the way you carry yourself a bit, inevitably.
I think that's interesting, but I think you're right. I know writers that they've got that hesitation even when they've got 4 or 5 novels behind them. They say, I'm a teacher, but I write a bit, and you go, you're published. And, it's interesting. Well, Callum, absolutely loved Paperboy, loved Squeaky Clean as well. But I said, this for me, turns it up to 11 in the words of Spinal Tap, and I'm really looking forward to the third one already. Can't wait. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.